back to when blockbusters never slowed down to hold your hand. You were tossed into the fire and expected to survive the chaos. In 1981, Paramount Pictures unveiled a masterpiece that changed adventure forever. Steven Spielberg and George Lucas joined forces to craft a sprawling worldwide odyssey. Harrison Ford donned the battered hat to become the world's favorite rugged scholar. He handled every ordeal with leather lead and a stubborn refusal to quit. Karen Allen brought Marion Ravenwood to life, a heroine who was truly formidable. John Rhys-Davies and Denholm Elliott added the perfect touch of charm to this cast. They made ancient history deadly again, and now we explore 15 strange secrets. This is the making of Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. Before the journey starts, please subscribe and help us celebrate cinema history. Your support lets us revisit the beautiful madness of the films we love. Let's dive in and stay for Fact 1, born from a lucky accident. That defining moment was played by a man struggling just to stay upright. Fact 15. Tom Selleck was actually picked before Harrison Ford even entered. Ford was quite low on the list as the role belonged to Selleck. He delivered a screen test with Sean Young that was absolutely flawless and captivating. Their shared energy was incredible, proving Selleck was a truly gifted performer. The creators were sold on his rugged charm and his imposing physical presence. He officially signed on, but then CBS decided they were not letting go. He had already committed to a television pilot for a series called Magnum PY. Network executives suddenly enforced his contract, blocking his leap to the big screen. They chose that exact moment to greenlight his detective series and stop Indy. That show made him a legend, but cost him a piece of history. The production was left hanging when the network refused to release their star. With filming looming, the directors scrambled while Selleck remained legally bound. He was stuck in Hawaii while a massive opportunity slipped away from him. Ironically, a writer's strike halted his show, later leaving his time wasted. In another world, he could have finished the film before television even began. He might have owned the franchise, but destiny opened another door instead. George Lucas originally resisted Ford wanting a fresh face for this new hero. He did not want his Star Wars star, but eventually Ford stepped in anyway. He brought a gritty soul that echoed the frustration of a missed chance. The offer hung there for weeks, a detail Harrison Ford finds amusing today. Ford eventually became the character, playing a hero who felt messy and human. He portrayed a man who survived through grit rather than effortless movie grace. Fact 14. Ford performed those dangerous high-speed truck maneuvers by himself. He refused a double, jokingly downplaying the lethal risks of the sequence. He figured if it were truly fatal, they would have filmed it later. He did the work himself, inspired by the legends of classic Western cinema. The crew dug into the road so he could safely slide beneath it. The entire chase was captured live without the help of modern computer tricks. They blasted a telephone pole through the floorboards to launch the truck skyward. Freeze the frame, and you can still see the mechanical secret at work. That airfield battle concludes with a massive explosion of an experimental Nazi aircraft. A massive inferno. The crew engineered a life-sized aircraft using metal and wood, weighing enough to feel frighteningly substantial. A genuine war machine. The British firm Vickers assembled and delivered the frame as if it were army junk. It was no flimsy toy. It commanded space. To achieve true realism, the director's crew filled the vessel with dangerous liquids and explosive charges. Ignite the wick film the burst and finish. However, fate chose a different path. Once the fuses sparked, the resulting boom proved far more intense than predicted. A searing wave tore through the landing strip. Shrapnel whistled toward places where bystanders stood. Performers and staff fled as if a mortar had landed nearby. Remarkably, no one suffered a scratch. After the haze vanished and safety was confirmed, they realized they were unharmed. The filmmaker reviewed the tape and kept the take because it was perfect. Entry 12. The leading lady nearly went up in flames while the cameras kept rolling. That Himalayan tavern brawl was far from staged. Our heroine stood her ground, trading blows like a seasoned street fighter. She moved with the grit of someone who had survived many nights. Earlier, she refused to hold back, choosing to deliver every strike with total conviction. There was no room for faking. That desperation on her face wasn't merely a performance, reality had begun to blur with the script. Safety teams waited nearby with damp fabrics and tools hoping they wouldn't be needed. Suddenly, the nightmare scenario unfolded. Her clothing ignited and a small blaze began climbing toward her neck. The camera captured every flicker of the spreading heat. Someone sprinted into the frame to smother the heat before it reached her skin. It wasn't a rehearsed stunt, but a rescue. Though she escaped harm, the adrenaline left her heart racing for hours. It was her baptism by fire in the world of movies. The visionary behind the lens was shouting cues about gore and mayhem. He pushed her into a world of pure imagination. Back in 1980, the rules for protecting actors were much looser than today. They just cleaned her off and kept going. The finished sequence carries a frantic, jagged energy that feels almost uncomfortable. You can sense the genuine panic beneath the surface. That sharp edge came from the very real brush with a hospital bed. Her terror wasn't a choice. It was an instinct. The character survived the thugs, while the actress survived the hazards of the industry. It was a victory for both the fiction and the reality. Number 11. A giant stone grew larger because a director couldn't stop dreaming. That opening sprint is burned into our collective memories. Our hero seizes the gold, and a massive 22-foot orb begins its deadly descent. It was designed to turn a legend into dust. The sheer scale of the pursuing object felt like a force of nature. It was an unstoppable hunter made of synthetic material. What was meant to be a brief moment turned into a centerpiece. The filmmaker was mesmerized by how the shadows danced around the monster. Harrison Ford was truly running for his future, desperate to outpace the crushing weight. Every step felt like a gamble with his safety. The set was expanded to give the chase more room to breathe. They needed more time to build that unbearable tension. The prop moved with a mindless mechanical hunger that ignored any human plea. It was a reckless gamble that nearly ended in disaster. Looking back, the creator admitted the whole idea was sheer madness. He was just tossing out wild thoughts to see what stuck. He envisioned a massive, rolling boulder that would relentlessly pursue our hero through the darkness. It was a simple, terrifying concept. The goal was to have death nipping at his heels until the very last second. It was a flash of inspiration that changed action cinema. That was director speak for a plan that could have been lethal. Ironically, the actual prop was eerily quiet as it rolled. The hollow shell whispered along its tracks, providing none of the necessary dread. The weight of the world had to be added later. A sound wizard named Ben Burtt had to invent the sound of doom. He blended the crunch of tires on stones with the roar. Suddenly, the fake ball sounded like 10 tons of ancient, angry earth. The audio alone made your chest tighten with fear. The final cut remains one of the most iconic images in all of film. It set the bar for every adventure that followed. Number 10. Thousands of serpents simply weren't enough to satisfy the vision. We needed an ocean of scales to tell this story. The request was simple: double the number of reptiles to fill the frame. They wanted a living carpet of hissing nightmares. Thousands of cold-blooded extras were gathered for that underground tomb. It was a massive logistical feat to keep them in place. Even with that many, the floor still looked too empty. The slithering sea didn't feel deep enough for the hero's struggle. Under the scorching lights, the snakes grew tired and stopped moving. They weren't performing with the necessary intensity. Some actually drifted off to sleep while the cameras were rolling. They were the world's most difficult background actors. The crew started cutting up water hoses to fill the gaps. They scattered thousands of pieces of rubber among the living creatures. In the dim light, the mixture of fake and real was impossible to tell apart. It became a singular, writhing landscape of terror. The leading man had to navigate this minefield despite his own genuine phobia. He faced his fears for the sake of the silver screen. A hooded killer's faint image nearly vanishes against that transparent divider. Heavy machinery didn't flinch the star, but those vipers truly chilled the protagonist, though his leading lady faced greater terrors. One terrifying sequence placed a lethal predator right against her cheek, distanced only by a thin plastic sliver. Inches from certain tragedy. The beast struck the divider mid-take with force, leaving a mark for sharp-eyed fans to find later. That subtle glimmer reminds us how close they came to a dark headline instead of a hit. We saw nightmares. The staff felt the grit of making magic with prayer and hoses. On to entry 9. This legendary explorer actually began with a stroll along the shoreline following a bit of professional heartbreak. Two young visionaries brainstormed while avoiding their actual career obligations back in 1977. After being turned away from his dream project, Stephen found George hiding in paradise. While one friend dodged the spotlight, the other dreamed of global escapades and daring feats. They envisioned a rugged traveler who used his fists to solve mysteries rather than gadgets. A gritty academic who struggled through the dirt of the past rather than gliding above it. This rough concept had been simmering in the background for quite some time. Before the world knew the name, the moniker was far more common. Feeling the original choice lacked spirit, they changed it right there in the surf. That brief exchange on the coast changed the face of cinema and birthed a classic. A gifted writer eventually polished their beachside brainstorm into a masterpiece long after the spy role vanished. Out of career frustration and nerves came a whip, a hat, and a legend. Tinseltown's greatest creations often start with a strange mix of luck and rejection. Here is number 8. A young boy's imagination eventually dictated the very first frame of a cinematic phenomenon. He was already playing the part of a studio executive during his childhood home movies. His fictional brand name was a clever nod to his own German heritage and a famous mountain. He basically built his own cinematic empire before he ever stepped on a professional set. One specific visual transition haunted his creative mind since his youth, waiting for the right moment. He dreamed of seeing a flat illustration melt away into a rugged, real-world landscape. The hunt for the Ark finally gave him the opportunity to execute that long-held vision. A producer scoured the islands looking for a specific natural twin for the corporate logo. He spent hours comparing the Hawaiian horizon to a famous sketch until he found it. Eventually, a perfect match was discovered among the tropical ridges of Mount Kalalea. The director immediately fell in love with how the painted peak transformed into a real vista. This elegant transition became the doorway into a classic adventure we all remember. It took 20 years to fulfill that simple childhood visual promise before the action started. He even opted for a vintage brand look from the 1940s to enhance the nostalgic mood. That grainy old-school feel transported us back in time before our hero even appeared. The visuals established the timeline long before a single word was uttered by the cast. A kid's hobby became the blueprint for a cinematic revolution that defined a decade. In a way, he'd been preparing for this debut his entire life, just waiting for a mountain. If these glimpses behind the curtain move you, please support the channel and join our community. Your help allows us to keep exploring the hidden stories of the films that shaped us. They utilized clever, old-fashioned deception to build this world, leading us to number 7. The final result feels incredibly expensive, though the reality was much more frugal behind the scenes. It looks like pure prestige despite the creative corner-cutting. The filmmaker was actually being quite thrifty, saving funds wherever he could. Working with limits, he found brilliant ways to recreate the past without a massive bill. To save money, the crew scavenged vintage newsreels to build their world. They salvaged footage of 1930s Washington from an old Hindenburg reel. Ever wonder what other pieces of history are hiding in plain sight? This gritty aesthetic wasn't about ancient myths, but the spirit of a 1975 disaster flick. It had zero to do with explorers or melting faces. Can you imagine this classic without that 75 edge? The escape plane seen in Nepal was actually a relic from a 1973 adventure that time forgot. It's a beautiful reminder that every great movie is built on the bones of another. What other forgotten films are still living in our favorites? That same handmade devotion haunts the very final shot of the film. After our hero survives the impossible, the prize is simply locked away in wood. Don't you wish you could see inside that crate just one last time? Labeled and forgotten, the relic vanishes into a sea of identical boxes. It's the ultimate victory of boring paperwork over the power of the gods. Makes you wonder if those quiet warehouses are where the world's real secrets live. Resembling a graveyard for old office furniture, this sequence was a direct nod to Citizen Kane. The director knew that sometimes the greatest treasures are the ones we simply discard. Isn't it strange how the most epic journeys end in a quiet room? Wells pulls back the lens to reveal a mountain of unwanted memories where a childhood sled is treated like junk. It's a haunting reminder of how much we lose as time marches on. What was the last thing you valued that simply vanished? It's the same visual poetry and emotional gut punch, just with a different fedora. Interestingly, that massive storage room wasn't even a real place. Isn't it amazing what a little movie magic can do for the soul? Artist Michael Pangrazio rendered that entire world onto a sheet of glass. He left just a tiny gap for a single soul to vanish into the shadows. Does it make you miss the days when cinema was painted by hand? A solitary man and a single box lost among endless fading shelves. What started as a wild ride suddenly felt like a heavy, ancient myth. Why does the end of a great adventure always feel like a little bit of a tragedy? The filmmaker dug through the trash of the industry to find his gold, then used a vintage trick to remind us that even icons get put on a shelf. Do we ever really lose our legends, or are they just waiting to be found? Coming in at number 6, we find two very modern mechanical friends hiding inside a tomb of ghosts. It seems even the builders of the pyramids had some high-tech visitors. Could those little droids have been watching the whole time? The artists at Lucasfilm have always loved a good inside joke. In this film, they hid one of their best secrets right in front of our eyes. Don't you love that feeling when you finally spot something you've missed for years? Etched into the golden stone pillars deep beneath the Egyptian sands are two very familiar silhouettes. It looks like the galaxy's favorite robots were there since the dawn of time. Imagine stumbling onto that kind of history in a dark room. These two droids are carved into the walls like sacred symbols, looking like they've been waiting for 3,000 years. Makes you think about how deep the bond between these stories really goes. How long have they been keeping that secret? You can see them clearly on a pillar just to the hero's left as he prepares to uncover the gold. It's a wink and a nod that bridges two different universes. Did you notice them the first time you watched the scene? A creative mind who worked on both Star Wars and these desert adventures couldn't help but leave a little galactic graffiti behind. It's the kind of personal touch that makes these movies feel like home. Who wouldn't want to leave their mark? While the rest of the room was perfectly authentic, those tiny robot engravings stayed hidden on the wall. They are the little quirks that make us keep coming back. What other secrets are still waiting in the dark? There are even more delicate details that only the most eagle-eyed fans have managed to find. A second carving rests even deeper within the tomb's architecture. Do you think we've truly seen everything there is to see? One specific image appears to show a princess passing secret plans to her loyal companion, forever preserved as art. It's a beautiful collision of two cinematic worlds. Doesn't it make the universe feel just a little bit smaller and more magical? That tradition continued years later with the same robots appearing in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull like little stowaways. They are like a lucky charm for the fans who know where to look. Don't you love it when a story stays with you? It's a secret handshake for the fans who aren't afraid to hit the pause button and dig deeper. A reward for the people who truly love the details. Are you the kind of person who looks for those hidden messages? Number 5 brings us a simple popcorn flick that became a literal national treasure. What began as a fun afternoon grew into something that will last forever. Can you remember the first time you felt that movie magic? In 1999, the Library of Congress took a quiet but monumental step to save this story. They officially chose to protect this adventure for the sake of the future. Doesn't it feel good knowing our favorite memories are safe? Being part of the National Film Registry means a movie is more than just entertainment. It's a part of our history. It's the highest honor a motion picture can receive in this country. What movie would you want to save for 1,000 years? It's funny to think of such a formal title for a movie where a tired hero just shoots a bad guy. Sometimes the most important art is also the most fun. Isn't it great when we don't have to take ourselves too seriously? Yet, there it sits standing shoulder to shoulder with Casablanca and Star Wars. It proved that a leather jacket and a whip belonged next to the greatest stories ever told. Who would have thought a pulp adventure would become an icon? The creators never set out to make something important or highbrow. They just wanted to give us a fast, classic thrill. Do you miss the days when movies were just about the pure joy of the ride? There were no dreams of awards, just 2 hours of pure excitement wrapped in a fedora. It was a love letter to the old Saturday serials. Why does that simple formula still feel so perfect today? 20 years later, the world looked at that spark of energy and decided it needed to live forever. It's a piece of our shared childhood that will never fade. Don't you wish everything we loved could stay this vibrant? Now, a perfect copy is locked away in a library vault safe from the passage of time. It's there for every child who hasn't discovered the adventure yet. Isn't there something comforting about a story that never grows old? Future generations will see every grain of sand and hear every whip crack exactly as we did. The magic is being held in a bottle for the world of tomorrow. What part of the story do you hope they never forget? Our favorite archaeologist spent his life hunting for pieces of the past only to become one himself. History has a funny way of coming full circle. Have you ever wondered what artifacts we're leaving behind? The man who claimed things belong in museums finally found his home in one. For number 4, let's talk about the day George Lucas lost his mind. Can you imagine spending hours trying to reason with a tiny animal? In the middle of a crowded Cairo market, our heroes found a tiny, unwanted companion. It seemed like a cute addition to the cast at first. Why is it always the smallest things that cause the most trouble? This little capuchin wasn't just a pet. It was a tiny spy working for the villains. It's a betrayal that still stings every time you watch it. Did you ever trust that little guy for even a second? The primate was actually a secret agent reporting back with a chilling gesture. It's one of those bizarre details that only happens in a movie like this. Do you think that little monkey knew whose side he was on? Trying to capture that specific moment nearly pushed the director to the edge. The animal was trained to follow commands, but things didn't go as planned on set. Why does the simplest shot always seem the hardest to get? During practice, the little guy was a pro, but as soon as the cameras rolled, he forgot everything. It was a classic case of stage fright in the animal kingdom. Have you ever had a moment where you just couldn't perform? The crew had to get creative dangling sweet grapes just out of reach to get the right movement. They needed that arm to stretch high into the air. Isn't it funny how much work goes into a single second of film? They rolled the camera over 50 times, hoping that just one frame would look like a military salute. It was a mountain of footage just for a tiny primate to reach for fruit. Do you think you'd have the patience for 50 takes? The man who gave us the stars was the one overseeing this tiny, chaotic operation. It's a long way from space battles to supervising a monkey's lunch. Does it make the director feel more human, knowing he had days like this? One of the most famous storytellers in history spent his afternoon bargaining with a primate over grapes. It's a side of filmmaking the audience never sees. What would you do if your legacy depended on a handful of fruit? He wasn't exactly having the best day of his life while filming that sequence. But in the end, they found that one golden moment in the edit. Isn't it incredible how much effort it takes to create a legend? The tiny arm went up, the timing was perfect, and they finally caught the lightning in a bottle. It was the end of a very long day for everyone involved. Don't you love it when a plan finally comes together? Imagine a primate dictating the pace while our leading man braved peril and his co-star faced the heat. Danger felt like a silent cast member on that set. A tiny fruit-loving creature brought a massive production to a halt simply by being difficult. This leads us to our third legendary secret. That famous felt accessory wasn't just clothing, it was a technical achievement. Without it, our hero looks like a mere academic lost in the dust. During his most grueling hours, that silhouette remained essential to the story. It defined the legend and was an absolute requirement for the frame. Gravity constantly tried to steal his dignity as the headpiece refused to stay put during those first takes. Staying covered was a daily struggle. Every frantic chase or heavy stunt risked losing the most vital piece of the costume. It made every beat of action feel like a gamble. Burning through the budget for runaway clothes wasn't an option for the studio. The crew stopped seeing it as fashion and saw it as gear. They used hidden tension bands to anchor the brim against the star's forehead. It was a secret bond that the lens never revealed to us. This rigging allowed for intense brawls without the felt soaring away into the sky. It let the performer be reckless yet stay composed. The solution worked, though Deborah Nadoolman Landis had already spent hours making the piece look battered. She wanted it to tell a story. She personally abused the material so it looked like it had traveled the entire globe. It needed to feel like an old companion to him. For us to believe in this scholar, his gear needed to look grounded in reality. We had to see the history etched into his clothes. That worn-in look helped it sit lower, making the internal rigging much easier to hide. It created that perfect, shadowed gaze we all love. While the Doctor survived traps and villains, his headwear survived the grind of Hollywood. Our second mystery is about a famous name. In the summer of 1981, a masterpiece arrived without the lead's name on the marquee. The spectacle alone spoke to the crowd. The posters simply promised a quest for biblical treasure under a single word. It was a lean, mysterious title that stood entirely alone. Paramount took a gamble on an unknown protagonist, trusting the audience's curiosity. They prioritized the adventure over the brand name back then. That confidence paid off the moment the traps were first sprung. Within minutes, everyone knew they were watching a legend take flight. Between the snap of the whip and that brass melody, he needed no introduction. His identity was etched into the music and the shadows. For decades, that was the only name we knew and loved. But as the stories expanded, the need for a unified series grew. George Lucas wanted a consistent label to help the film stand out on blockbuster shelves. It was a shift toward modern branding.